You ever get that feeling, like something's off? You can't explain why, but something deep in your gut tells you that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. It's easy to brush that off, to keep moving forward, but sometimes ignoring that feeling can cost you everything. Sam knew it was a bad idea to start this hike so late in the day. He was running out of daylight, and deep down, he understood he probably wouldn't make it the full 4 miles to the campsite he'd planned on. Still, he figured he was in good shape, and with some effort, he could probably reach the 2 or 3 mile mark before it got fully dark. There were a few decent spots to set up camp along the way, so he decided to go for it. But the terrain was tougher than expected, and Sam wasn't moving as quickly as he'd hoped. Pretty soon, the sun dipped below the trees, and he was swallowed by darkness. He flicked on his flashlight, but it barely cut through the pitch black ahead of him, maybe 10 feet of visibility at best. At one point, Sam stumbled on a rock and almost went down hard. Had he fallen, he would have been seriously hurt, far from help, in an area with bad cell service, and on dangerous, narrow roads that barely saw traffic. No one knew exactly where he was. It hit him like a cold wave. He'd made a mistake. Sam decided right then that he needed to stop pushing his luck. He scanned around with his flashlight and saw a small clearing about 30 feet off the trail. As he stepped into it, he found remnants of an old fire pit, just a few rocks in a circle, maybe blackened a little by soot. That gave him some peace of mind. Someone had camped here before, and they had clearly made it out. He felt a little more confident after that. Smart, even. Sam hadn't brought a tent. He preferred to sleep on a foam pad with a sleeping bag and hang a tarp above him in case it rained. The surrounding pine trees made it easy to rig up, and soon he had everything set. A small fire crackled in front of him, casting warm orange light into the clearing. He popped open a can of beans and started eating. That's when he felt it. Something was off. He couldn't explain it. He wasn't hearing anything. Nothing had happened, but his skin prickled and his stomach tightened. He glanced around, eyes scanning the trees. But if you've ever sat beside a fire in the forest, you know your visibility is almost non-existent. The light makes it nearly impossible to see past a few feet. Everything outside the glow is swallowed in black. He tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just nerves. But then, a small rock, about the size of a marble, came flying out of the trees and landed right by his feet. He froze. That immediate rush of dread he'd been feeling suddenly had a face. He stood up, trying to peer through the shadows beyond the trees, but it was no use. He couldn't see anything. Over the next 15 minutes, Sam kept scanning and listening. He didn't hear any more movement, and no more rocks came flying into the clearing. Eventually, he started to rationalize it. Maybe he kicked it earlier, and it just shifted. Maybe a pine cone fell and knocked it loose. He told himself anything that would explain it away. Slowly, he settled back down and crawled into his sleeping bag beneath the tarp. Hours passed. At some point during the night, Sam jolted awake. The dread was back, stronger this time, and he still couldn't see or hear anything clearly. But then, he heard leaves rustling. Soft at first, like someone walking slowly, deliberately, about 30 or 40 meters out. He strained to hear. Were they coming toward him? Moving away? It was hard to tell. After a while, the sounds faded. He started to relax just a little. Maybe they'd walked off. Still, just to be safe, he reached out next to him to grab his flashlight. It was gone. He sat up, confused. He had left it right next to him when he went to sleep. He patted around, checking under the bag, the tarp. Nothing. That's when his stomach dropped. There was no way the flashlight moved unless someone, or something, had come right up to him while he was asleep. He crawled out of his sleeping bag and scanned the area. That's when he saw it. His flashlight was on the ground, about 10 meters away, in the same direction the footsteps had come from. The realization hit him like a brick. Whoever had taken the flashlight was close enough to reach over him, silently, in the middle of the night, then place it out there on purpose. This wasn't an accident. This was bait. He felt like he was going to be sick, but he knew one thing. He wasn't falling for it. Sam slipped on his boots, grabbed his knife, and backed toward the fire. He stoked it up, made it as large and bright as possible, and kept his eyes locked on the direction where the light had been placed. He didn't dare move. For hours, Sam stood there, knife in hand, staring into the dark. From time to time, he'd hear those footsteps again, crunching leaves, stopping and starting. Every time the fire began to die down, the sounds got closer. When he stoked the flames higher, they stayed back. But by 3 a.m., Sam had a new problem. He was out of firewood, and there was no way he was stepping into those trees to get more. As the fire dimmed, the footsteps came closer than ever. They stopped 3 meters away, but whoever, or whatever, it was had chosen to stand behind the thickest patch of trees. Sam couldn't see anything beyond them, but he could feel them. They were just there, waiting. And for 2 hours, that's how it stayed. Sam stood motionless, facing the trees, his grip tight on the knife, too terrified to even blink. His mind ran wild, imagining who, or what, was staring back from the dark. Finally, just before dawn, he heard it. Movement, branches shifting, footsteps running away. Whoever had been out there, they were gone. Sam didn't move until the sun was fully up. Then, and only then, he packed his gear and started walking, fast. He didn't stop, not to rest, not to eat, not to breathe, just walked. He made it all the way back to the parking lot, jumped in his car, and didn't look back. 20 miles down the road, he pulled into a gas station. He just needed to sit, breathe, get his heart rate down. He got a drink inside, then came back out to the car, and that's when he saw it. Written in the dust on the back window of his car were the words, "Sleep well." Sam is absolutely convinced that whoever, or whatever, had been stalking him in that forest, followed him back to his car, and left that message. And sometimes he still thinks about what would have happened if he'd gone to pick up that flashlight.
Story 1. I was house sitting for my grandma one weekend while she went to Florida with some of her church friends. I was sleeping in the guest bedroom next to her room. The guest bedroom always had 2 twin beds inside of it that my brother and I would sleep in when we had sleepovers at her house. I took the bed next to the window, but before getting into bed, I checked all the doors, making sure they were locked. When I did get into bed, it was early, and I didn't actually go to sleep for a while. There wasn't much to do at my grandma's house. I was just on my phone for an hour or two watching videos, texting people, whatever. That's when I thought I could start hearing someone's voice outside. It sounded like a woman's voice, saying, "Hello." I left the bedroom and inched my way closer to the front door, moving slow because I was trying to listen. It was a woman's voice just going, "Hello," like every 10 seconds. As I got closer to the front door, I realized that's where it seemed to be coming from. My grandma's door doesn't have a peephole, but the windows in her dining room gave a clear view of the front porch. So I went over to that window to attempt to get a view of who was out there. I tried peeking my head in between the plastic blinds without making it obvious, but I guess I didn't do a good job of that because when I looked, I did see a woman on my grandma's stoop, and she was looking right at me as if she knew I was going to be looking through those blinds. Once again, she said hello with some freakish smile on her face. This woman was older, but don't picture her as some innocent-looking small old lady. She looked like she was maybe late 50s, early 60s, and something about her face just skeeved me out. I moved away from the window and thought maybe it was one of my grandma's friends. It was midnight, though. Why would anyone come to the door that late? Why wouldn't she knock or ring the bell? Why was she just standing out there going, "Hello," over and over? I was genuinely unsettled. I just went back to the guest bedroom and shut the door. Now, with the door shut, as opposed to before, I couldn't hear that woman anymore. Maybe, who was that, and where, she just decided to leave. I started texting everyone about it, my sisters, my friends, telling them how bizarre it was. But a good amount of time passed in silence and I was starting to calm down. My sisters were telling me to call Grandma, but there was a 0% chance she was awake, and she barely ever even checked her cell phone anyway. Just like that, something broke the silence. A banging at the window. Not a knocking or tapping. Banging. I felt that fierce pain in my chest area as my body entered that fight-or-flight mode. Shortly after the banging stopped, I heard that familiar voice say, "Hello." With that boost of adrenaline, I guess I had the extra confidence to grab the blinds and push them up. There I was, face to face with this horrifying older lady, with only a thin layer of glass between us. I screamed at her smiling, gross face. I'm calling the cops. I pulled the blind back down and ran back out to the living room. I looked around the house, then ran upstairs to box myself into the upstairs guest bedroom. I didn't want to actually call the cops. I don't know why. I wanted to just wait it out. I crawled into the bed in the upstairs guest bedroom and tucked myself under the covers. A couple hours later, I was still awake, and I finally only then went back downstairs to look outside each window. That freaky old lady seemed to be gone. The next morning, I called my grandma and told her what happened. She started yelling into the phone, clearly panicking and distressed. She told me how a few days earlier she was being watched in the grocery store by some woman about 10 years younger than her who just kept smiling at her for no reason. I told her to calm down. I didn't entirely know whether to correlate the two or not, but when we eventually got off the phone with each other, I did have to give it a second thought. My grandma is 75. She has lost a bit of her wits, so I do have to take some of the things she says with a grain of salt. But the way she yelled into the phone about the woman in the store really gave me the chills. I still wonder if it could have been the same person. Story 2. My name is Nicholas, currently a freshman at Syracuse University, which doesn't exactly sit in the safest area. I had just gone through a breakup with my first girlfriend, so I started getting back into the online dating scene. I was using that Hinge app when I found some blonde girl named Stephanie who I really connected with. She also went to Syracuse. We both liked to read, to go to the movies. We even had the same sense of humor. I suggested we go on a movie date, and she said she'd love to. She told me to meet her at some specific point near campus and she'd pick me up. So around 9 o'clock, I waited on some corner of a normal neighborhood block, waiting for Stephanie. She asked me to share my location with her, and so I did. A few minutes later, I saw a car turn down the street and start approaching me. Then it stopped in front of me and the driver rolled down the window. It wasn't Stephanie though, but some old random guy. He asked what I was doing alone out here, which was insanely weird. First of all, I said I was waiting for someone. He asked if I was waiting for Stephanie, and I said, yeah. How'd you know? He said he was Stephanie's father and told me to hop in so he could give me a ride to her. I took a good look at him, and he looked a little old to be her father, to be honest. I'm no idiot when it comes to sketchy situations, so I said in a firm voice, "Why didn't you tell me you'd be picking me up?" He claimed he didn't trust a random guy meeting up with his daughter and wanted to meet me first. I took another good look at the man and didn't say anything. I simply started walking away in the opposite direction from where his car was facing. He started yelling, "Hey! Hey!" sounding surprised that I was just walking away like that. But I've heard way too many kidnapping stories to know where this could potentially go. I heard the guy's car moving, and I turned to make sure he wasn't doing a U-turn to follow me. I breathed a sigh of relief when he drove straight and turned left out of sight. I continued walking down the block toward campus. I got to the corner of the block. I was just about to make a turn when I noticed what I was pretty sure to be the same car the man was driving, just parked on the side of the road with the lights shut off. I briefly tried looking into the window as I passed, but the glass was tinted. I tried not making it obvious that I was suspicious and continued walking. I got a text from the so-called Stephanie person saying, "Why didn't you get in the car with my dad?" I ignored the text and continued walking. I kept looking back to see if the car would move. When I got to an intersection in the road, I turned right and then full-on booked it in the direction of campus. Surprisingly, I wasn't followed. I made it back to campus out of breath and started walking to my dorm building. I felt like I heard footsteps following me, though. I thought maybe I was being paranoid until I heard a piece of broken glass being kicked by someone's shoe. I knew I was being tailed. I made a point of ducking down behind a van and stopping to give me time to listen for where the footsteps were coming from. They were a few cars away from me. And I remembered, I never stopped sharing my location with Stephanie. Or should I say, that man. I saw him. He was that old man. He was approaching from between two cars across from me. He yelled something that I didn't fully understand, but it sounded like he said, "Come back and I'll take you to her." He had to be like 60-something. There's no way he would catch me if I sprinted. I lost him easily when I ran and made it back to my dorm room. My roommate wasn't there, so I had no one to talk to about it. But when I laid in bed, I got another text from that man, and it was shocking. It said, "You're a little piece of. You're lucky you got away. I would have strangled your ugly ass." I still have the screenshot. I replied saying, "Thanks for the threat. It's going straight to the police," and I blocked his number. I still have the conversation saved as evidence, and I plan on going to the police with it eventually. Hopefully they are able to do something about it. Story 3. When I was 18, I had a side job as a part-time janitor at my high school over the summer. I would work sometimes days and sometimes nights, anywhere from 9 a.m. to 12 a.m., depending on how much money I needed. Oftentimes, I would be left to lock up the building when the older janitors had left. This was a time before the high school had cameras installed in every single hallway. So one night, one of my superiors, Tom, had to leave early, meaning I'd be finishing up the rest of my shift alone, and I'd be locking up for the night. He told me to text him if I needed anything, as he always did, and then he left. I loved it when I was left alone because usually I'd just do half an hour of work and then just hang around on my phone or leave early and still get paid for the whole shift. I definitely pushed it with the things I'd get away with at that place. One of the things Tom asked me to do before leaving was bring all the extra seats in the gymnasium from the assembly down to the basement storage room, so I figured I'd do that, then just go home. I grabbed a stack of 6 chairs and started carrying it down to the basement. The lights in the storage room were very dim. They kind of sucked. The whole basement of that school wasn't exactly pretty. It felt more like a basement to a warehouse. Anyway, there were what appeared to be a bunch of art mannequins covered by paint cloths. You know, those big things that look like blankets. It seemed all the school's art supplies were stored down here. I dropped the stack of chairs down where the rest of the chairs were stored and went back up to the gym to get more. When I came back down with more chairs, I noticed one of the mannequins was exposed now. The blanket was removed from on top of it. I know for sure it was covered minutes earlier because it was one of the front ones. I texted Tom saying, "I think someone's down in the basement." He said back, "What do you mean?" And I said, "One of the art cloths was moved." He took a minute to respond, saying no one else should be there. And I noticed something. The art cloth tucked in the corner of the storage room, sitting outside of the light that was produced at the center of the room. It was covering something, surely. I started to tiptoe over to it. When I was a few feet away from it, I realized whatever was under that cloth. It was moving just ever so slightly. There was undoubtedly someone hiding under there. I ran back upstairs and locked the basement door. I texted Tom saying, "Someone is hiding under a cloth in the basement." He said call the cops, but I insisted he just come back since he only just left like 10 minutes ago. He didn't want to come back though. He told me to be a man and confront whoever was down there. So I went down to the basement again. However, the cloth was now strewn flat on the floor, and whoever was hiding under there was gone. But possibly the scariest thing was yet to happen. As I stood in the storage room, there were loud metallic thumps coming from above my head. I looked up and saw indents slowly forming in the large air vents above me. Someone was crawling through the main duct, then just stopped, literally above me. And then, bangs. Bangs like whoever was in there was trying to break open the floor of the air vents. I didn't know what was happening, but I was officially done with this. I ran up the stairs, locked up the school, and went home. I told Tom the partial truth the next day, that I thought I saw someone in the corner and it was gone when I went back, and I claimed there was nothing else I could say. Thank God it was my last week there, so it wasn't my concern anymore.
I was the only one home one Saturday night. I was sound asleep in my bed when I woke up and heard Siri on my phone talking. I turned it off, figuring it was just a glitch, and went back to sleep. An hour later, Siri woke me up again. I was a little freaked out now. Siri was responding to a strange sentence. What that found for us. And Siri's response was, "The answer is Thursday, July 4th, 1776. It was freaky as hell, but I still ended up dismissing it as a glitch. One more time, I woke up to Siri speaking. This time, the sentence Siri was replying to was my full name, and her response was, "Here's the info for my name." At that point, I ran to my parents' room, locked the door, and slept in there. I still have doubts about whether it was really just a glitch. I was home alone playing computer games at like 2 in the morning when a knock came at my window. My head shot around to face the window, but there wasn't anyone there. It was winter, so I had my window shut, and my room was on the first floor. I guess you can call me the unconfrontational gamer type, so all I did was just shut my blinds to let the pranksters know I wasn't interested. Enough time passed where I was able to forget about the knocking and get back into my game, until another steady set of knocks came at the window. I was so uneasy now. Why were they doing this? Why couldn't they just leave me alone? But by the slim chance that they actually needed something, I lifted the blinds and pulled open my window just a crack. That was the biggest and most foolish mistake I'd ever made. 2 hands from the darkness outside grabbed the bottom of the window and pushed it all the way up. I started screaming, throwing non-stop punches at the hooded man dressed in all black trying to enter my room. I grabbed the lamp sitting on my desk and bashed him in the head with it. He fell back outside, giving me the chance to shut my window. I saw him run away off our property into the darkness. I have never had a more horrifying experience. I lived way out in the country, like the turn-off-the-paved road kind of country. I heard something crash on the roof and then smash into our metal chimney. For the next hour or so, I could hear it banging from inside the chimney, which should have been impossible since we had covered it for the summer. Then, the front door started rattling, as if someone was pulling on it, trying to get inside. I peered through the peephole, but couldn't see anything. I finally threw open the door, and then everything stopped and went quiet. I was home alone one day in the summer. I was doing the usual watching of movies in the living room when I heard some shuffling noises coming from above me. Our living room ceiling is super high, so the attic is the only room above it. I lowered the TV down a little so I could better hear the shuffling noises coming from up there. The attic was connected to my brother's bedroom through his closet. I went to his closet and opened the attic door. The light in there was broken, so I had to use a flashlight. I only made it about 2 steps in before I heard the sound of the weak wooden floors across the attic creaking, and then the sound of something brushing up against one of the plastic bags on the floor. I jumped out of the attic, slamming the door shut and calling my parents. My dad had a look in there when he got home, but he didn't find anything. I'm just happy it's not my room that's connected to the attic. Me and my dog Layla were home alone. I had the music turned up loud in my room, and yet I was still able to hear Layla barking like crazy at something. As I was leaving my room and walking downstairs, I heard Layla stomping down the basement stairs, still barking. I followed her, turning the basement light on. She was in an attack stance, barking at the closed door to the boiler room. I knocked on the door, asking if anyone was in there. Layla was going crazy at this point, jumping on the door, scratching it, basically trying to break it down. I decided that if something was really in there, I didn't want to see what it was. I dragged Layla by the collar all the way back upstairs and locked the basement door. When my dad got home, I made him check the boiler room. But on his way there, he saw that there was a ladder placed on the wall by the basement window, and the window had been smashed open. My dad called the police, sounding worried, but I didn't yet know what was going on. Turned out Layla was barking at an intruder, and that I should consider myself lucky that I didn't open that door. It was very common for me to be home alone at night, as I only lived with my dad, and his shifts would constantly change from days to nights. This happened around the time my dad was doing night shifts. I would stay up really late on these nights watching movies. It's always taken me a long time to fall asleep, so after turning off the TV to go to sleep, I probably laid there for a good half hour. Then, I heard a toy fall over in my toy closet. It was nothing too suspicious, but it still creeped me out. But then the doorknob to my closet started to wiggle, until finally unlocking the door. I hid under my covers, not making a sound. It was strangely quiet for a good 2 minutes, so I finally peeked my head out of the covers. There was a figure standing next to my bed, looking down at me. I screamed at the top of my lungs and began hugging the wall behind me. The figure looked out the window and then just walked away out of the room. I stayed in that position for like an hour before checking if he was really gone. The front door was left wide open, so it seemed he had left. I didn't get a minute of sleep that night. This story is from the point of view of a 16-year-old girl. I used to have a boy living next door to me that was obsessed with me. His name was Joey. Every time I would go outside, Joey would come outside as well, as if he were watching me through his windows, waiting for me. He was 17 and very weird, and he didn't seem to have any friends, as he was always home. I tried to give every sign possible that I didn't like this guy, but he wouldn't get the message. So I had to finally just tell him one day that I don't like him, and to leave me alone. The look on his face that day is something that won't leave me. It was the kind of angry look a toddler gives their parents when they can't have a toy. Coming from a 17-year-old, that's much more disturbing. One night my parents left me to watch the house. I was working on a school project when I felt my bed shift a little bit. I looked under my bed. I screamed as I saw Joey laying under my bed. I ran away while he tried to crawl out from under my bed. I ran to his house and rang the bell at least 10 times, telling his parents about it when they opened the door. Joey never came out of my house, so I called the police. His parents begged me not to, but I ignored them. The police found him still in my room and arrested him. Apparently, he admitted this wasn't the first time he had hid under my bed. They also found pictures of me scattered across his room. The most disturbing one was of me sleeping, and it was taken from inside my room. I live in the country, and more often than not, I was home alone. We don't have any neighbours close by, so I would usually just sit in the yard and tan on sunny days. There was this one time that the sun was out strong and I was tanning in our yard when I saw somebody standing in the woods watching me. I sat up in a position, ready to get up and run. Do you need something?" I yelled. The guy walked out from the woods and over to me, telling me that he lives up the hill and was wondering if I could help him out with a broken water pump. I told him that I was about to head out and that I didn't have time. It was a lie, of course, but there was no way I was going with him. He walked off back into the woods until passing a boulder, and I couldn't see him anymore. I was more creeped out than I had ever been in my life, so with that, I folded my lounge chair up and went inside, being sure to lock all the doors and windows. You would think it ended there, but it didn't. About an hour later, I realised I forgot my sunglasses outside in the grass, so I went back out to get them. I made sure the guy wasn't anywhere in sight before going out there. It took me a little while to finally find my sunglasses, and as I feared, when I looked up, I saw the guy again. This time though, he wasn't in the woods. He was kind of hiding behind our shed so that only half of his body was visible. I yelled that I was calling the cops and ran back inside to do just that. The cops came and took down my description of the guy. Fortunately, I've never seen him since. This happened to me when I was really little. I was 7 years old, but I still remember all of it like it happened yesterday. I was sleeping over at my grandma's house like I always did when I was little. She never drove her whole life for some reason, so she would constantly be taking long walks everywhere. One day when I was sleeping over, she wanted to walk all the way to the library, which was like 10 blocks away. I didn't want to take that walk. I was a lazy kid, so she went off and told me not to answer the door to anyone. My grandma was the kind of person that was strict and didn't baby people, so it wasn't unusual for her to leave me by myself at such a young age. Sometime, while I was alone, the phone rang. I, being a dumb and curious little boy, answered it. It was a man on the other end. I remember he said, "Who is this?" I said, "Danny." "Are your parents home, Danny?" I said, "No." "So you're home alone right now, Danny?" I said, "Yes." "Where are you at right now, Danny? Do you know the address?" Somewhere in Queens," I told him. "All right, Danny. Bye-bye now." He hung up. I don't even remember thinking twice about it, but the story didn't end there, unfortunately. I'd say, almost an hour later, a knock came at the door. I remembered what my grandma said, so I remained on the couch. "I see you on the couch, Danny." My little heart sank. I noticed him through the window. He was on the porch staring at me. He was a very creepy-looking man, all grey, ugly, and with a fat beard gut. I told him to go away. "I got some candy in my truck. Come on out, Danny." I ran to the guest bedroom that I slept in and locked the door. Moments later, I heard the back door being fiddled with, followed by banging and thumping as he tried to break down the door. By some miracle, I heard the loud voice of my grandmother as she yelled at him to get the hell out of the yard and that she's calling the cops. I watched through the window as the guy took off in his ratty pickup truck as my grandma tried to get the plate number. Unfortunately, she didn't remember it, but she still reported him and his vehicle to the cops. My mum never trusted my grandma to watch me again after that, but I still know that if she had arrived even 10 minutes later, God only knows what would have happened to me. I recently moved out and I already have a horror story to tell. The house I moved into isn't anything impressive, it's just a house that's appropriate for 1 or 2 people. But I'd say right away, I started hearing weird sounds coming from inside the walls. I first heard it in the kitchen, and then in the bathroom, but on night 3, I started hearing it in my bedroom. I was sure there was some kind of animal living in my walls, I just had to figure out how to get rid of it. The next morning, I didn't even have enough milk to fill the bowl of cereal. I couldn't believe I hadn't realised I needed more milk. In fact, I seemed to be eating up all of my food pretty fast. I woke up in the middle of that night to the sound of breathing, not my breathing. It sounded just like the breathing of a person. I flipped the lamp on, and it stopped. I chalked it up as my mind playing tricks on me. After waking up the next day, it was really hot, so I turned on the AC for the first time. I checked every single vent, and some of them weren't blowing any air, one of them being the vent right next to my bed. I peered through the vent with a flashlight. There wasn't even a duct behind the vent, it was just the inside of the wall. It seemed that whatever air duct was in there had been removed. Unfortunately, I didn't look into the air conditioning system while buying the house, so I didn't know about this. That night, I had to sleep in the heat with no AC, so I was up pretty late, constantly rolling around and flipping the pillow over. Then, I eventually started to hear the breathing again, but this time I was fully awake. I knew it was real this time. It was coming to my left. I looked to my left at the air vent. The sound was surely coming from in there. I grabbed the flashlight again and shined it in through the vent. I dropped it and screamed. There was someone's face peering through the cracks of the vents. The first thing I saw were their eyes, open wide and glowing. I screamed all the way down and out the house. I soon found out there was a crazy, dangerous homeless man living in my walls, and he had been eating my food ever since I moved in. Tonight, I have 5 true Reddit horror stories. These aren't ghost stories or made-up legends. These are real situations shared by real people. Sit back and listen. Story 1. When I was 16, I worked night shifts at a fast food place. It was a small town, and late shifts were usually dead. One night while closing, a man came to the locked front door, pounding and yelling, demanding we let him in. We shook our heads and gestured that we were closed, but he didn't leave. Instead, he circled the building, banging on the windows. At first we thought he was drunk, but something about the way he moved was different. He was deliberate, almost methodical, testing each door and window. Then we heard glass shatter. He threw a brick through the front door window and crawled through, cutting himself badly. Blood streaked the floor as he staggered inside, grabbing anything he could find. My co-worker and I ran to the back, locking ourselves inside the freezer while our manager called 911. We had to brace the door with our bodies because it didn't lock properly from the inside. Through the gaps, we heard him screaming, throwing things, and slamming against doors. When police finally arrived, they had to tase him to subdue him. He was high on meth and PCP, and they later found out he had stabbed a gas station clerk an hour earlier. If he hadn't been so injured and confused, we probably wouldn't have made it. After that, I quit night shifts for good. Story 2. I used to walk home late after work because I didn't have a car. The walk was about 20 minutes through a residential area. One night, I noticed an old, beat-up sedan creeping behind me. Every time I stopped, it stopped. I cut across streets randomly and even ducked through a small park, but the car kept following. I called my brother, whispering into my phone, heart pounding. I ducked behind a dumpster and waited, peeking out just enough to see. The car passed slowly, then stopped a few yards ahead. A man got out and started looking around with a flashlight. He wasn't just looking for a dropped item, he was looking for me. I texted my brother my location. I stayed hidden until the guy got back in his car and circled the block again. Minutes later, my brother pulled up in his truck and I bolted into it. The car tried to follow, but my brother drove straight to a police station. We reported it, but without a plate number, they couldn't do anything. A few days later, there was a news report about a woman a few neighborhoods over who had been grabbed off the street and forced into a trunk. The vehicle description matched exactly. I still think about how close I came to vanishing that night. Story 3. My cousin was attending a university in a sketchy part of town and rented a tiny apartment alone. She started noticing weird things. Food missing, lights left on. She swore she turned off, windows unlocked. She thought she was just being forgetful. Then, one night, she woke up around 2 a.m. to what she thought was whispering. At first, she thought it was neighbours, but it was coming from inside her apartment. She froze. The whispering continued, low, raspy, like someone talking to themselves. She locked her bedroom door quietly and called the cops. When they arrived, they found a man hiding behind her couch. He was filthy, carrying a knife and a backpack full of her personal belongings. They searched the building and found he'd been living in the crawl space above her bathroom ceiling, slipping down through the air vent when she left or slept. He'd been watching her for weeks. They also found a journal he kept, pages and pages about her, what times she left, what she wore when she showered. The police said if she hadn't called that night, it probably would have escalated to something far worse. Story 4. A few years back, I was babysitting 2 kids in a really nice suburb. It was late, after 11 p.m, when I heard someone knocking. At first it was soft, almost polite. I ignored it. The knocking got louder. Then it turned into pounding. I looked through the peephole and saw a man wearing a hoodie, standing too close to the door. He wasn't carrying anything, wasn't selling anything, just staring. I texted the kids' parents, but they didn't respond. Then the man started jiggling the doorknob violently. I called the police, whispering into the phone. As I waited, the man circled the house, tapping on windows, shining a flashlight inside. Then he disappeared. Minutes later, I heard scraping at the back patio door. He was trying to pry it open. I grabbed the kids from their beds and hid us all in the upstairs bathroom, locking the door. We could hear him banging around downstairs, trying every window. It took police 15 minutes to get there, and when they did, they found him hiding in the garage with a crowbar, gloves, and zip ties. Turns out he was a serial burglar who had graduated to violent home invasions. They found a knife taped to his ankle when they frisked him. I think about how bad that night could have ended if one door or window had been left unlocked. Story 5. When I was about 10, I was home alone for a short time after school every day. One afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my parents had drilled into me never to open the door for strangers. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a delivery uniform holding a package. I shouted through the door that my parents weren't home, and he needed to leave the package. His entire demeanor changed. He started shouting, slamming his fists against the door, trying to kick it in. I ran upstairs and hid under my bed, clutching the cordless phone. I called my dad, whispering that someone was trying to break in. I heard the man walk around the side of the house, trying the windows. One window in the living room wasn't fully locked, and I heard it slide open. Footsteps creaked across the wood floor. I held my breath as he entered the house, listening to him move through the living room, down the hall. He tried the door to my parents' room. I heard drawers opening and things being tossed around. Luckily, he didn't find me. Minutes later, my dad arrived, pulling into the driveway fast. I heard the man bolt out the back door and into the woods behind our house. Police later said multiple homes had been targeted by a group pretending to be delivery drivers, looking for easy break-ins. Some of them ended violently. After that, my parents got a security system, but I never really felt safe in that house again. Being home alone can be peaceful, but sometimes it turns into something much worse. These are 4 true horror stories from people who found out the hard way that solitude can be dangerous. When I was 16, my parents decided to take a weekend trip and left me alone at home for the first time. At first I was excited. No rules, no one telling me when to go to bed. It felt like freedom. Around midnight, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard the sound of our front doorknob rattling. It wasn't a casual jiggle either. It was forceful, like someone was really trying to get in. At first, I thought maybe my parents had come home early and forgotten their keys. But when I peeked out from behind my curtain, I saw a man standing there. He was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, and he kept his head low. My heart dropped into my stomach. I stood frozen for a few seconds, just watching him fumble with the lock. After a while, he stepped back and walked around the side of the house. That's when I knew it wasn't some innocent mistake. I grabbed a baseball bat from my closet and locked myself in the upstairs bathroom. Through the small window, I saw him again, now trying to pry open the basement window with what looked like a crowbar. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely dial 911. I whispered to the dispatcher, explaining what was happening. She stayed on the line with me, telling me to stay as quiet as possible. About 10 minutes later, flashing red and blue lights lit up the street. The man tried to run, but the officers caught him hiding behind our shed. Later, they told me he had a long criminal record, mostly for burglaries. If I hadn't heard the door, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. Second story, I was 22 years old and had just moved into my first real apartment by myself. It was a tiny place in a sketchy part of town, but it was all I could afford. On my second night there, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a soft tapping on my front door. Half asleep, I sat up in bed and just listened. After a few seconds, the tapping turned into a steady, rhythmic knocking. Something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I stayed perfectly still. After about a minute, the knocking got louder, turning into full-on pounding. I sat there, heart racing, trying to figure out what to do. Then, I heard a man's voice, low and angry, saying, "I know you're in there. Open up." I felt like I was going to throw up. I grabbed my phone, crawled into the tiny coat closet, and called 911. While I was whispering to the dispatcher, I heard the sound of metal scraping against the lock, like he was trying to pick it. I was convinced he was going to get in. It felt like forever, but after about 5 minutes, the noise stopped. When the police arrived, they found pry marks on the door, but no sign of the man. They told me there had been multiple reports of someone targeting apartments late at night, knocking to see if anyone would answer before trying to break in. After that night, I installed a second deadbolt, a chain lock, and bought a cheap security camera. I never slept easy in that place again. Third story, when I was about 14, I stayed home from school one day because I was sick. Both my parents had to work, so they left me with the usual instructions to stay inside and rest. I spent most of the morning watching TV on the couch, wrapped up in a blanket. Around noon, I heard the front door open. I figured maybe my mum had come home to check on me, so I called out to her. No answer. I called again, louder. Still nothing. That's when I noticed that the footsteps didn't sound like my mum's. They were heavy, slow, deliberate. I immediately felt that gut punch feeling of something being wrong. I grabbed my phone and slid under my bed. I tried to stay as still and quiet as possible. From under the bed, I could see the shadow of someone standing in the hallway outside my room. They just stood there, silent, like they were listening. It felt like an eternity, but finally the person turned and walked back down the hall. I heard the door open and close. I stayed hidden for another hour, terrified they might still be inside. When I finally worked up the nerve to check the house, I found muddy footprints leading from the front door to the hallway and back out again. The police said it looked like someone had walked in off the street, maybe thinking the house was empty. We never found out who it was. After that, my parents made sure every door and window was locked at all times. Fourth story, I was 17 and my parents had gone out for a late dinner, telling me they wouldn't be back until after midnight. I didn't mind being alone. I actually enjoyed it. I was sitting in the living room watching a movie when I noticed headlights pulling into our driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone. Curious but cautious, I turned off the TV and peered through the blinds. A man I didn't recognize got out of the car. He wasn't dressed like a delivery guy or anything, just jeans and a jacket. Instead of ringing the doorbell, he went straight for the doorknob and tried it. When it didn't open, he casually walked around the side of the house. My stomach dropped. I ran to the back door and locked it just as he reached it. Through the window I could see him pulling on the handle, testing it. Then he moved to the windows, tapping on them lightly. I turned off all the lights and hid behind the couch, trying to stay calm. I could hear him circling the house, tapping on different windows, trying to find a way in. I called 911, whispering into the phone. The dispatcher told me to stay hidden and stay quiet. After about 10 minutes, the sound of an engine revving filled the air, and I heard the car peel out of the driveway. The police showed up shortly after. A neighbour had seen the guy and wrote down his license plate. Turns out the car was stolen, and the man driving it was caught trying to break into another house later that night. They said he was likely scouting out homes that looked empty. If I hadn't locked that back door in time, things could have gone very differently. Being home alone is supposed to be safe, a place where you can relax, but sometimes it's anything but.
Hey everyone, welcome to a chilling video where we dive into 3 true horror stories that'll make your skin crawl. These are real accounts, no paranormal stuff, just the terrifying reality of what people have experienced. Let's get started. Story number 1, The Nighttime Intruder. In 2019, a woman named Sarah lived alone in a small apartment in Chicago. One night, around 2 a.m., she woke up to the sound of her bedroom door creaking open. She froze, thinking she must have left it ajar. But then, she heard soft footsteps on the carpet. Her heart raced as she lay still, pretending to sleep. She peeked through her eyelids and saw a shadow moving toward her dresser. The intruder, a man she didn't recognize, was rummaging through her things, completely unaware she was awake. Sarah didn't have her phone nearby and her apartment was on the 3rd floor, so jumping out the window wasn't an option. She held her breath, praying he'd leave. After what felt like an eternity, he grabbed some jewelry and slipped out. Sarah waited until she heard the front door click shut before bolting to lock it and call the police. They found fingerprints matching a known burglar who'd been targeting apartments in the area. Sarah moved out the next month, unable to feel safe there again. A few weeks later, Sarah learned from a neighbor that the same man had tried breaking into another apartment in the building the following night. He was caught after tripping an alarm and arrested with stolen goods from multiple homes. Sarah started checking her locks obsessively and installed a security system in her new place. She also joined a self-defense class, determined never to feel that helpless again. The thought of him standing over her while she slept still haunts her. Story number 2, The Ride Gone Wrong. In 2021, a college student named Mike was hitchhiking in rural Nevada to save money on a trip home. A pickup truck pulled over, and the driver, a middle-aged man, seemed friendly enough, offering to take him 100 miles closer to his destination. Mike hopped in, grateful. About 20 minutes into the drive, the man started asking weird questions like whether Mike traveled alone often or if anyone knew where he was. The vibe shifted, and Mike noticed the driver kept glancing at a duffel bag in the back seat. When Mike casually asked what was in it, the man snapped, "None of your business," and sped up. Panicked, Mike made up a story about his friends expecting him at the next gas station and texted his location to a friend from his phone, pretending to check the time. At the gas station, Mike spotted a rest stop and asked to get out, saying he needed a break. The driver reluctantly pulled over, and Mike grabbed his backpack and bolted, hiding behind the building until the truck drove off. He later learned from local news that the driver had a history of picking up hitchhikers and robbing them, sometimes worse. Mike never hitchhiked again. He reported the incident to the police, who tracked down the driver a week later after another hitchhiker escaped a similar encounter. The man had weapons and duct tape in his truck, confirming Mike's worst fears. Mike now warns others about the dangers of hitchhiking and sticks to public transport. He still checks over his shoulder when traveling alone. Story number 3, The Stalker in Plain Sight. In 2023, a woman named Emily, who worked at a coffee shop in Seattle, started noticing a regular customer acting strange. He'd come in daily, always sitting in her section, staring at her for hours while barely touching his coffee. At first, she brushed it off as him being socially awkward, but then he started showing up at her gym, her grocery store, even her apartment complex. She never saw him follow her, but he'd always be there, watching. Emily reported it to the police, but they said they couldn't do much since he hadn't threatened her directly. One evening, she found a note slipped under her door that read, "I know your schedule now." Terrified, she installed a security camera and caught him on tape lingering outside her building at night. With the footage, the police were able to arrest him. Turns out, he'd been fired from a job for similar behavior and had a restraining order from another woman in a different city. Emily now carries pepper spray and checks her surroundings constantly. After the arrest, Emily discovered he'd been keeping a notebook with details about her shifts, her car, and even her friends' names. The police found it in his apartment, along with photos of her taken from a distance. Emily quit her job at the coffee shop and moved to a new neighborhood. She now advocates for stronger stalking laws and shares her story to help others recognize warning signs. Months later, she learned the man had violated his parole by contacting another victim, proving he was still a threat. Story number 4. The Wrong House. In 2020, a couple named Tom and Lisa were staying at a rental cabin in the woods of Oregon for a weekend getaway. Late one night, they heard a car pull up outside. Thinking it was a neighbor, they ignored it until someone started banging on the door, shouting to be let in. Tom looked through the window and saw 2 men, one holding a tire iron. The men claimed they were at the wrong address, but they kept trying the door handle and circling the cabin. Lisa called 911, whispering to avoid being heard. The men started smashing a window, and Tom grabbed a fireplace poker to defend themselves. Before the men could break in, police sirens scared them off. The cops later caught them a mile away, drunk and with stolen goods from another cabin. Tom and Lisa cut their trip short, shaken by how close they came to a violent confrontation. They later found out the men had targeted the area for weeks, breaking into vacation homes. Story number 5. The Delivery Trap. In 2022, a man named David ordered food delivery to his apartment in Atlanta. When the delivery guy arrived, he seemed nervous, asking to use the bathroom. David let him in, but noticed the guy was looking around too much, not just heading to the bathroom. Feeling uneasy, David stayed near the door. The delivery guy came out and asked for a glass of water, which seemed like a stall tactic. David said no and asked him to leave. The guy got aggressive, demanding cash, but David pushed him out and locked the door. He called the police, who found the delivery guy in the parking lot with a knife and zip ties. He wasn't a real delivery driver, but someone using the app to scout victims. David now verifies delivery people through his peephole and never lets strangers inside. Story number 6. The Parking Lot Ambush. In 2024, a nurse named Rachel was leaving her late shift at a hospital in Dallas. As she walked to her car in the dimly lit parking lot, she noticed a van parked next to her vehicle with its side door open. A man approached, asking for directions, but he kept getting closer, blocking her path. Rachel sensed danger and backed away, pulling out her keys and pressing her car's panic button. The alarm startled the man, who ran to the van and sped off. Security footage showed he'd been waiting in the lot for over an hour, likely targeting lone workers. Police linked him to several assaults in the area. Rachel now parks closer to the hospital entrance and walks with coworkers at night. Thanks for watching these unsettling true stories. Stay safe out there.